right. Hello, everybody. Can I say hi to a few faces? Welcome to beautiful Vancouver, Canada. Welcome to our show. We're really excited to share the opening of Houdini 21 with you. Thank you so much for joining us. As I was preparing for this keynote, I was thinking, I don't think I remember another Houdini release that has nearly the size of this Houdini 21. It doesn't pack nearly the power of this release, but that's not what makes it truly major, guys. What makes it major is the production readiness of the feature set across nearly the entire span of the CG pipeline. So this is the big differentiator. Also, in this release, no new Copernicuses, no new frameworks, no new op contexts. Our singular focus was to finish what we started. I know you've been waiting for us to say that for a long time. Well, we try with every release, but certainly in this release, the main focus was finishing what we started. And that is completing the feature set. It meant robustness, performance, ease of use, overall quality of life. Like, all these things are important. And just because that led to the largest number of features in Houdini ever is secondary. What really matters is the unifying force of that mandate that we gave ourselves. Finish what you started, because that is what informed our decisions. It validated, it crystallized our thoughts, it led to a certain cohesiveness in the efforts of R&D. And hopefully it will show when you start playing with it. All right. The biggest qualitative change in Houdini 21 comes from us promoting several major frameworks from beta to production-ready status. So that's the really big deal here. And I think you know which some of those are. Of course, it's the Apex-driven animation, rigging, actually motion mixing as well, okay, that lives inside KineFX. It's Copernicus with its myriad of uses in 2D and 3D, more now than last year. And then it's Vulkan. It's the Vulkan Viewport that's now taken over from OpenGL entirely and is slowly crossing into cinematic territory. Secondly, we've had some nice features there, that have been ripening well on the vine, you know, and seeing some really nice adoption out there. And they too have gone up in terms of functionality, sophistication, maturity in this release. Again, you might guess which they are. They're Solaris, they're Karma, especially the XPU is amazing in this release. And then it's the NPM dynamic solver. Both took a pretty significant leap in functionality and ease of use. And if I am to talk about NPM, honestly, guys, it's probably a spectacular leap, as you'll see later today. Okay, so there's that. So definitely worth checking them out, and we'll show you lots of that tonight. We'll be here for a good 2 hours or more. So thirdly, there's one more section of Houdini that's seen a boost. And these are features that we had labeled gold already, but somehow they never quite reached their full potential. And the primary ones are terrain erosion, which you use in film, you use in games a lot, right? And the other one is the muscle system. So both of these now are completely redone. They generate really beautiful, accurate, physically correct results, and they're much easier to set up and to control. They're actually a lot of fun to use right now. So this is just really high-level summary of the big qualitative changes to Houdini 21. But before we go into the demos themselves, I want to talk about another technology that permeates all these changes and does so more and more deeply, and that is machine learning. Ooh, no? The room is cool? All right, that's great. I'm happy to not hear anything. Because the truth is, ML is here to stay, all right? And if employed smartly, it can be of great value. So speaking of using it smartly, our approach continues to be cool and collected, okay? Not giving in to hype. Our focus is on looking for those tools that we can give you, sometimes small gens, sometimes a bigger workflow, but tools that enhance your productivity, that add to the value of proceduralism of Houdini, that give more value to your skill set, Nothing, however, that takes away control from you. We understand the type of tools and art that you produce, and for that, control is paramount. And so all the tools that we're building, and you'll see quite a few that we have in Houdini 21, speak to that kind of philosophy, to that language. There's more I want to say here, though. Houdini's use of ML, which has now gone past the exploratory and foundational stages and into actual solutions, which is what you'll see in Houdini 21, is not a threat to your jobs. Okay, it is not a threat to your jobs. It's meant to enhance the value of your position as a professional, to make you better, to make you faster, to get you closer to a result without having to, again, to sacrifice the ability to instruct the tool to do what you want it to do. We're not giving you a prompt that solves all your problems. Maybe we will one day, but we're certainly not there at this point, and this is not how we think about it. So let me make this clear. You will not lose your jobs to the AI in Houdini, okay? On the contrary, your job should be more stable. You should benefit more from that. First, from the knowledge you gain simply by learning and understanding about what this beast can do. I don't mean Houdini, I mean ML. And secondly, you'll benefit, we believe, from that gain in productivity that you do get through ML, again, if smartly employed. So we believe it can be of benefit to you. And ultimately, guys, if there's a safe vessel to get on board with, to get across these uncertain times and reach the shores on the other side better prepared, we believe that vessel is Houdini. So ultimately, we want to build tools that will make it better for you to get where you need to be, all right? And we hope that you will continue, we hope that we continue to do the right thing by you so that your trust in us continue to be as strong as it is today, okay? All right, so let's get closer to demo time. I'll introduce the first chapter, and it is KineFX. So one of our biggest efforts of the past decade that's coming to fruition today is Apex-driven rigging, animation, and motion mixing, all under the umbrella of KineFX. So with a workflow and feature set that are meant to be feel both familiar to you and compelling, so something that you feel you know already that you can build upon, and something new that makes it better and faster for you to get where you need to be. So this is Apex KineFX. So this is built upon the proceduralism in Houdini. It's built upon the physical simulation capabilities of Houdini, but it does bring something new, and that's what we'll try to show you today. You saw it in Houdini 20, Houdini 20.5. Certain things were still raw. You had to dig deep to get into Apex. What did Apex? I don't need Apex. How is that good for me? I think we have a really compelling story tonight, and Esther will get to that in a few minutes. But before we do that, I want to say that we've done a lot of work to get us to this point. And there's some other work that we do with partners in the industry for KineFX and other aspects of Houdini. But in this context, I really do want to mention the really great relationship that we have with our friends at Epic, and to announce that we've collaborated with them on a plugin that they've been writing for MetaHumans. The plugin is not ready, but very soon it will be available on Fab. And what it will allow you to do is to easily bring the beauty and capabilities of MetaHumans into Houdini for further animation, advanced simulation, lighting, rendering, what might have you. So even compositing eventually. So we're really excited about that, and this will be your first glimpse into it tonight. We're very happy to be able to share that with you. So now shall we get going? If Warren is nearby, we'd like to start with animation and find out what's new in Houdini 21. Welcome, Warren Leathem.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh. Thank you, Cristin. All right, we actually have a ton of stuff to go through today, so we're just going to jump right into this. And we're going to begin with the new feature in Ragdoll that we call tether. And I have electro tether to the motorcycle here, but you can see the hips are really stiff on the bike there. But what we could do is take the hip tether and we can start lowering the stiffness down. And now she's reacting a little bit more to the bike. But we can also put it straight down to 0 if we want. And now she's held on just by her feet and her hands. And we can do the same with the feet, so we can take the leg tethers and we can put them right to 0 as well. And now she's just holding on just by her hands. And these are all fully animatable parameters here. So you have a lot of control over how stiff or how loose your character will be. And so this allows us to do some interesting things, such as we can tether 5 electros together, and they start behaving almost like a rope. But at any time, we can still go in there, break the tethers, and now the ragdolls start acting individually again. Or we can have 3 tethers set up with a very low stiffness, and now I can just use one control, and I can start almost puppeting Electra around, almost as if she's a marionette. Or we can have one character dragging another and do this very simply. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to switch it to see our collision shapes, just to make this a little bit clearer to talk about. And so now if I select the 2 hands together, and when I hit H, it'll create a tether between the 2 of them. And we can go in there and we can adjust the stiffness value from there. And so if we press play, now we have one character pulling another. However, it's not really the result that I'm looking for, because that original animation was really lightweight swinging arm. It wasn't animated to be pulling something. But instead of me going in and having to redo all that animation, all I need to do is go in there and I can make that arm active. And now when we press play, we have a much better result. We now have a straight arm, feels much more like the character's dragging something. And we can do that because essentially what tether is doing is it can take multiple ragdolls and start combining them so that they behave almost as one. But at any time, say we wanted to have this character pull the other one and then release it, we can start breaking those tethers very easily just with a couple keys. So I can just enable or disable the tether there. And now when we press play, we have the multiple ragdolls behaving almost as one. And when it breaks, now they start acting individually again. And so we can use tether and ragdoll, and I can generate Electra's motion just based off of the motorcycle animation. But we also have a new feature for our CNAT prop node, which allows us to take non-deforming prefractured geometry and use it in Ragdoll. So now instead of Electra landing all nice and safely, we can start breaking the bike apart and having her crash. Or we can throw a wall in front of her, and now she can smash through the wall and crash. And the great thing about this is we're using the exact same tools as we would for Ragdoll for characters, but now we can start doing some simple destruction in animation as well. And afterwards, these are all still fully animatable. So say you had a rock that was intersecting through your camera or something. You can do any corrections with that very easily. And the way we are able to do that is with our CNAD prop node. What we would do is change it from static to animated. And now if we look at the wireframe, we can see that the node has generated points in that fracture geometry for us. And now we can use those points in Ragdoll or just general animation. And so now we can have her crashing through a wall and having the bike crash as well. And you may notice in my network editor here is that I'm kind of daisy chaining some scene animates together. So the red one was my original bike crash, and I didn't want to touch that. So I added the wall after, and then I just plugged another scene animate there. And it took all the information from the above one, brought it in non-destructively. And then we can just plug another scene animate in there, and I can do an alt here. So now she can hit the wall instead of breaking through it. So it's a really, really great way to be able to start just chaining your scene animates together and start layering your animation that way if you want. Next, using the MetaHuman plugin from Epic, we brought in a character to demonstrate our next feature, which is an animation and pose library, which we call the animation catalog. Now, included in Houdini, we have easy access to every pose, every animation on every character that you save into it. So instead of me manually posing a fist in every single shot that I need a fist, or manually posing an expression in every single shot I need that expression, now we can do it with a simple click of a button. But maybe we don't want that full pose to be on everything. Well, I have an eye set that I made here, so I can select that. And now when we hit apply to that, it will only apply it to the selected controls, leaving all the other controls as is. Or, you know what, maybe we don't want to put that full pose on our character. So what I can do here is I can take a look at my mouth set that I have, I can select it, and instead of hitting apply, what I can do is use the slider to blend in as much or as little of that pose as I want. So it's a really great way to be able to build poses from poses, build up your animation catalog, and get your blocking done quicker. And at any time, you can continue changing the pose from there, but we've gotten to this point much, much quicker using the animation catalog. And as an extra bonus, if you set up your characters like the MetaHumans are, set up the same way, I can use a pose from one character and I can just apply it to another. So if I select the two characters here, and when I hit apply, now you can see they both have the exact same expression put on them. So this could be a really great way, instead of having to manually build up a pose catalog for each individual character, for every character that you do, you can use one almost as a template, build up a bunch of expressions there, and then apply it to the other character. And we still have the ability to do any extra character traits that you may need on there. Of course, we may want to put some animation on there as well. So if we take a look at it, we have our animation. We click on the clip, we see a little preview of the animation so we know what we're going to apply to the character. And we can apply it in a similar way where we select the character, and now when we hit apply, we get that animation put onto the character. And we can do the same thing for a metal Electra here. And we can select her, we hit apply, and now we have the animation on both of them ready to go. So if I wanted to continue animating on this, but we had cameras going on, and I wanted to make sure that I could see my camera view as I'm animating through with my tumble view. Well, we have a new way of doing that as well. And what we'll do is take the perspective dropdown and do a tear-off viewport copy. And I'm just going to turn off the node guides here. And now we have an in-sync, fast, clean viewport to look at. So now I can go into my tumble view, I can start posing my character as I normally would, and we can see it update immediately in our camera view. And we could still go into that camera view and start animating even without the controls displayed. We also have some new ways that our controls display while we're animating. So here I just have some animation. You can see we have all our controls there. It's a bit cluttered going on. So if we hit P, we have some options here. And one of them is hide controls during playback. And we had this in Houdini 20.5. We play it, hides the controls. When we stop it, the controls come back. But now we've added hide controls during scrub. So now as you scrub your animation and hide it, you can see much, much clearer what your animation is. And when you release it, they're ready to be selected again. But perhaps my favorite, especially when you have facial and a whole bunch of overlapping controls, is hide controls during drag. So now as I start posing my character, it'll automatically hide all the controls for us, allowing the animator to see much clearer what they're posing. And if you notice, the handle is something similar as well here, where it'll hide all the axes I'm not using as I'm doing it. So again, it's a great way to clean up the clutter, allow the animator to see what poses that they're actually doing without having to manually constantly turn on and off controls all the time. And speaking of our handles, we have a whole bunch of new handle preferences. So if you take a look at this, you can set up a whole bunch of different things here. You can have the translate handles inside or outside of the tumble sphere. You can change the thickness, the scale, the lengths, the brightness of them. We can also change the alignment, so you can have it world versus local. But we also have a couple of presets set up for you. So we obviously have our default Houdini preset ready to go, but we also have one called traditional, which you may be more familiar with. And so now you can continue on going with this or customizing your handle for the exact way that you prefer to animate. We also have an updated Electra in Houdini 21. And so now we can turn on skin controls. So as you see my cursor going over everything, we have highlighting certain areas of Electra. And we can select them and we can start posing them just as we normally would do with just regular controls. But again, with the bonus of not actually having all that extra clutter on there. Or maybe we want to pose with full body IK. So if I wanted to pose this character around, I wanted the foot to stay on the ground. All we need to do is we can select those controls, and when we hit H, it'll pin them down there. So now I can start posing out my character, having that foot remain on the ground. And we could do this for any body part. So as we move it out, say the hand, I wanted to put it out somewhere and leave it in that spot. I just, again, hit H, and now it's locked in there. So as I move it around, we have the pose, that hand staying in position. And so once we're ready to do this, we can hit enter at any time. And when we go back out to animate, now we have all our controls exactly in the spot based on our full body IK posing. We also have a whole bunch of new features for constraints. So here, if I was wanting to constrain the hand to the top of the pole, well, what I could do is select the driven, I select the driver, I hit H, and now we have, they turn gray, we know they're constrained. But these types of constraints essentially just lock something in position, right? So you can see I have a big stretchy arm going on there, and obviously that's not a result I want. But instead of the animator going in and having to do a setup to work around this issue, or having extra things to be built in the rig, when we create a constraint in Houdini now, it automatically creates an extra control for us. And now we can use that extra control to animate any constraint without needing any extra setup. So now, instead of the stretchy arm, I could just slide it down. Now we fix that really quickly. Everything's still constrained. We can turn it around and we can take a look at it here. And we can see that the arm intersected through the body. Very easy to fix. Just select that control, move it out, set a key. Again, they're all gray. Everything's constrained. And these controls will work with all of our other animation tools, such as our animation sliders. So if we want to do breakdowns in there, we can do that very easily on them. Or perhaps my favorite, which is our global transform mode, which allows us to take our controls and move them around our last selected pivot. So sometimes when you constrain it this way, you may end up with kind of funky looking wrists. They may look a bit broken. So to fix it, we can do that really quickly. Again, we select that control, and then all we need to do is select the what we want to pivot around. We hold Control-Shift, and we can start fixing up those issues. So you see this one here, it's pretty broken, pretty looking bad. So we just do the same thing. I select that control, I select what I want to pivot it around, I hold Control-Shift, now I move it around, now I fix that bad looking wrist. Again, everything's still constrained. And so I've done something similar here, except that I just have the guitar and the hand kind of being driven by the hips. So as I move it down, we can see it, but we have these extra controls that are generated. I can do any animation I want on there. We can do any fixes, any offsets, any changes that we want. But you can see that the hand, the strumming hand, isn't constrained to anything. And that's because if I constrain it the same way, we'll lose that animation. And obviously we don't want that. So instead, I'm going to switch it from static constraint to a parent constraint. And now when I hit H, now it's parented to the guitar, and we play it through, we retain all that animation. And again, it still creates that extra control for us. So I can do any offsets, any changes, any fixes that we need to be done in that animation. And so what we could do is take that, you can have everything all constrained, all changing your animation in here, but we can do one more thing. We can take it, and I just have a locator here, and what we can do is switch it from an offset constraint to a look at constraint. And now I can just use the one control to start moving around the Electra. And again, retaining all those constraints, all that animation that we have in there. So it's a really great way to allow animators to animate any constraint without needing any extra setup, because our tool is what allows us to do this. And finally, we're going to talk about our new motion mixer. And essentially what this does, it allows us to take a bunch of different animation clips, and we can start blending them, mixing them together so we can create some new animation. And here I just have a run cycle, and if I wanted to make a run farther, we can just drag it farther out. We can make it run as far as we want. But I want to build up some animation going on here. So I'm just going to trim it back a bit, and then I'm going to bring in another clip. So when we go over here, we can just see it's a flip clip. And obviously, we probably want to jump over that gap in the floor. So to do this, all we need to do is select that, and I'm just going to line it up with the previous clip that we had there. And now you can see it's popping back to its original starting position. But to fix this, all we need to do is go Edit, Match Joint. And now with the right foot selected, when I hit Match Position on this, it'll snap it right to that spot. So now within a matter of moments, I've been able to cycle my animation, and add another animation on it, and we can have her leaping over the gap. And so I've just continued on this, adding a couple more clips in there, doing the exact same thing, matching the joint, kind of lining it up. But you may notice with these ones, I have a gap between them all. And that's because I'm just giving a little few frames to be able to blend the animation clips together so we don't have any harsh transitions. But because we're actually blending controls and not a skeleton, all of our AK remains intact. So you end up with no foot slipping. Now, I haven't done any animation on this. I've just taken the clips, started blending them together. But if I wanted to, all what I needed to do is go Add, Animate Effect. And what this will do is when I go into it, it allows us to have access to all of our Apex animation toolset. So our selection sets, our animation layers, our motion paths. And so if I went in and I looked at this and I'm like, you know what, I want to change the silhouette of these legs. I don't like that they're overlapping. We can do that very easily. You can see in my selection sets, I have a couple of them pinned. So I'm guaranteed to key the exact controls I want when I hit K. We can go in, we can change it around so that we can hide the controls that we don't want to see. And then we can continue posing as we just normally would. So we're just going to do a simple little change here, separating the legs, changing the silhouette, having them separated instead of overlapping. And now we play it through and we're like, okay, we're happy with that. So when we go out, maybe now we change our mind and go, you know what, maybe it's too much. Maybe we want to bring it back. Instead of me going in and having to reanimate that, now I can just key the weight of that. So I can blend in as much or little of that pose change as I wanted. And when I say we have access to all the Apex animation toolset, that includes Ragdoll. So now, not only can we take these clips, we can blend them together, start building out new animation. We can go in there, start keyframing everything, using our Apex toolset. We can start doing any changes, offsets, but we can also do some dynamics in Ragdoll. And so if I wanted to, I can constrain a hat onto Electra. Then I can have her jump through and break through the wall on a separate track, similar to the way we did it with the motorcycle. And then we can go in there, have it go into Ragdoll, have the hat break off. So it's really great because it's not just about blending clips together, but it's about having the control to actually start authoring new animation. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Esther to start talking about all the new amazing rig features that we have. Thank you very much.
Hi there. So we've seen now how feature-rich the options already are when it comes to animation. And when we think about what animation is, it's all about the viewport. It's all about having, like, in a very intuitive way to work. And we listen to you, and we want to transfer the same principles now over to the workflow of character setups. And with this release, we're introducing options to use drag and drop to simply assemble your rig components to get like a full rig within no time. That means for you, of course, getting your having like a very straightforward workflow. But at the same time, there's of course one thing that is very important to us. We want to stay procedural. We're Houdini. Procedural is what we do. So we want to still maintain that while we're interactive. And we want to give you a very wide range where you can position yourself. We want it to be fast and interactive, but yet at the same time, we don't want to black box anything, meaning you can still dive very deep into it and you can position yourself at your personal comfort level where you want to work with, and you can shuffle and mix it. And in order to achieve this, we're building upon the fundament that we already started with, which is our rig components, and we're simply enhancing it with an interactive interface. And here we have a glimpse at that. At the lower part, we see the component catalog. This is where our components live, and we can use them and drag and drop them onto our guides. That's what we see on the screen left side. So we want to configure that one to get to a final rig in the end, and that's what we see on the screen right. So let's see how that actually looks in action. So we simply start dragging the elements, and they automatically map to the best fit of joints that we find. All the transfer that we see here is still fully based on tags. That makes it incredibly flexible. What you should notice is that the rig, the final rig, is constantly updating to all the changes that we're doing. We also need to configure our rig, so we have configuration controls directly in the viewport. You could see we just changed the behavior of the mirroring. Now, of course, rest position changes are essential to rigs. You can do that in IK modes, in FK modes, and the rig directly reacts to it. Of course, control configuration is the next step that you would do. So color adjustments or shape adjustments, all directly available in the viewport. And you can see how incredibly fast and easy it is to assemble a full biped rig, or, well, any other rig, directly in the viewport, and you're done with your configurations, and you still have a lot of flexibility at your hands. So when we think about building characters and rigs, you very often will find similar types of characters again and again. And ideally, you do your configurations once. That's very efficient. You have one master template. And then you think about a way to transfer that over to other characters. And we have here an example. We have Electra. We just configured her. We're very happy with what we did. Now we have a different character, and we just connect the inputs. The different next character is not just bigger, a drag and drop action again, but we have like hierarchy, name, and orientation difference, and not just small ones between these rigs. And with our new hierarchy analysis, we can still smoothly transfer it over. And you know what? Since everything is built around tags, our rig can also mold to these essential skeleton differences, still allowing us to really quickly have the full functionality here available. When we're talking about templates, that pretty much leaves me to introduce you guys to this new character, which is Otto. So Otto is not just a character, it's a full asset that is being built in-house in Houdini. And it pretty much comes as a start point for you for your any kind of bipart work that you might want to do. It comes with a ton of templates, recipes. It's fully rigged. It comes with like a lot of CFX setups that we will see later in this presentation. And it comes when it comes to the rigging part, not just with the fact that Otto is rigged himself. That would be, well, just one thing. We want to use it as a starting point, so it comes with a rig template. That means you can adjust the character to the proportions that you need for your character and use the template to smoothly transfer the rig over and adapt to your personal workflow. So let's have a look at what we can do with Otto. Here we can see all the functionalities for like a full production standard bipart setup that you get with Otto. Otto is completely built with all our like body components that we now also pre-ship. They're much more like body part centric, and they're all also applicable in the Autorig Builder. What you can see here is, of course, things like IK-FK blending. We have blendable stretch behaviors. We have autoclavicles and many, many more features for you to explore when it comes to the bodies. We have configuration controls, the selector controls, and we even have advanced IK setups should that be something that you need for your close-up shots. In addition to that, we are also having a focus on anatomical skeleton setups. So here we have a combination of the autoclavicle and the scapula working together. We have here an area where the range of motion is actually very, very broad, and we have quite a complex motion, and all of that is being pre-shipped and can be adaptable. You can also use it as a single component. Same applies for the patella that we saw on the knee. Why is this important? Well, let's think a bit further. What attaches to bones? Well, that's muscles. And we need to be precise here, so it's important that we have a good fundament that we pre-deliver. And we didn't just stop there with some pre-shipped components. We also wanted to experiment with the options that ML regressions actually have for us in the pedo for it. So we did some very successful tests with corrective joint workflows. And the idea here is that you have an animation, like a calisthenic animation, that covers your range of motion. And you simply animate on top of that the correct appealing positions of your corrective joints. And you feed like the existing animation that you get and the correctives into the regression kernel. And it trains incredibly fast, and you very quickly see the result from that. So here, for example, we see now the scapula based on that process, and you see that you actually get very far with that approach. And interestingly enough, you don't even need that many animation frames to get quite a good result. And we can see it here again. And of course, we're going to continue with those in that direction, and in the future, you will very likely see more in that direction to come. Well, but now we're back. We actually need to get a character that we need to work with, and this is Harry. So this is our little friend here. He says hi. And we have an imaginary director who assigns us the job that we need to rig that character. And of course, what is he doing? He's also giving us a juicy deadline to get the character out of the door. So we want to start, and all we get from our director is, of course, just the model. Nothing else, no skeleton. Great. Luckily, we have the Autorig Builder, because it comes with a dual functionality. If you apply those components and you simply put them into empty space, it actually creates new body parts from you. If you apply it to existing ones, it uses those ones. And here you can see how we just built the legs pretty much out of nothing. Same goes now for the neck. And we just apply it, it automatically parents it. And you can even see that we can change the number of joints that we are now applying. All that is left for us to do is, of course, we need to place them based on our character. You should also check out that Harry, like the final Harry, constantly updates while we are changing those positions. So you can always check at any step what the final result will actually be. So we're happy. We got Harry very quickly to our director. We hit the deadline for our turnover. Well, that unfortunately didn't stop the director from changing the design. So now our character got wings. Well, this is a very specific design. It's a mechanical wing setup. You can be very certain that you cannot just solve this with an out-of-the-box solution. So what do we do with our crunchy deadline? So if you think about creating custom solutions, what we offered so far and what we still offer as the absolute powerhouse are our Autorig components. That's where you create them. You can, for example, use Apex script, and it's incredibly powerful. But we don't have time. So we start with a prototype just to get an idea of how we could even solve this mechanical problem. With this release, you can actually see the Apex graph like with the viewer state on, and you can check your results right away. That feels very intuitive. That kind of feels like VOPs, because your nodes are exactly what you see. You have a very direct relationship to that. That's very great, but up to now, it actually wasn't, because at that moment, proceduralism stopped. This changes with this release. We want to give you an option to turn your prototype into a tool. So here we're starting again. We start with FK. That's our prototype that we just built, and we pipe it into the rig component. Now it's being fused in, aka connected and merged in. You see the green nodes down there? That's the fused part, and you see you have the full functionality available. You actually even get more out of it because you can even mirror and remap that setup, all without having even written a single line of code. Your prototype is a tool in no time at all. That's of course really great because, yay, Harry has wings. It worked, the director is happy. He's unfortunately a bit too happy because now, of course, he also wants to apply to the next character in the same deadline. Luckily, we used the fuse graph workflow because the result of the fuse graphs is a rig component like any other. It's exactly the same format. That means you can actually save it out to our component catalog. Now you can use drag and drop. You just have two drag actions, and your complete wing setup is added to Electra. And it's not just added, it's properly connected and parented in, and you can see you have the full functionality here, beautifully available with the whole rig mechanics that we of course need for the setup. And yes, she's also considerably larger than Harry. It's not just the same setup fully copied over. So what we learned from this is that we now have a very nice choice of tools that we can use and shuffle and mix. We can simply use the pre-shipped components out of the box and use them. We can also have all our custom components that we built before, use drag and drop and just apply them. If we need to have a custom solution and we want to have a simple answer for a simple problem, we can use the fuse graph and create new elements from that. And if you really want to dive deeper for the complex solutions, you always have Apex script and component snippets at your hand, and you can mix and match them in the workflow in the same rig without any problem. So, but in order to, well, of course, give you all these new interactive goodies, we also had to work on a few core elements to bring it all together. And I'm going to mention three here. The first one that you will kind of see here is, of course, the work on our controls. Then I'm going to mention splines and blend shape workflows. When you come to the topic of controls, it was very important to us to turn controls into something that is more than just the standard selector, and that's the end of it. A control is a UI element for an animator, and we should also value and respect it as such one, and we can open up so many possibilities by simply adding more functionalities. I'm going to show you a few in a second, such as control groups and custom widgets and whatnot. So here, for example, we saw already the example from Warren about skin controls. We simply need to select a control, select an area of our character, and instantly that geometry area of our character is associated with the control. This is very easy to set up. The character is decluttered, and that's something that you could even do per shot basis to change it based on your personal convenience. Another very cool aspect that we added to the functionalities of controls are triggers. With this little menu, what we actually did is we switched some subnodes. We changed the input character here. Control triggers are nothing but Python callbacks. So here we're just opening a help file. Control triggers pretty much turn your controls and your drag and drop actions into buttons. You can connect any kind of like complex pipeline action that you want the animator to interact with easily now in a control button, and it will feel a lot more intuitive for the animator. I mean, if you're up for it, configure for your animator an order lunch button, all possible. So, and of course, you can even push it further if you want to. You can also create your own interaction gadgets. The system is completely open here. So what we want to do here is we want to create a little fancy gear control for Electra's hat. And we want to change her, well, the head gear and the color. So let's see what we're doing. So you see, first of all, we have a little menu. We can change the gear. And we have that graph here on the side. And that is actually our control gadget graph that we are kind of like checking in the viewport. I'm changing the parameter on that apex graph, and we see directly in the viewport, the whole thing looks completely different. And now I'm commenting something out in the code, complete look change. Why is this important? Why is this interesting? That means if it's just a graph, it can be stored with any kind of geometry. That's pretty great. That means you don't need a plugin if you just want to have a new fancy cool interface for your animator. You can actually store it with the character. That's really great for any type of collaboration. And of course, it also means if it can live right next to my viewport, I can iterate very, very quickly over it to design that. And especially for these interactions, you constantly need to go back and forth. So it really helps. Coming now to the next topics, which is splines. Usually, if you think about splines, I mean, maybe the first thing you think about is, of course, these very complex examples like rope rigs or tentacles, which is kind of like the holy grail of rigging. But it's also other elements. You find them everywhere. You find them in faces. You find them pretty much in all our body parts that we are shipping as components. And we want to give you a much more flexible and robust basis that actually simplifies these incredibly complex workflows that you usually have around splines tremendously, simply with a few node types that we are adding. And here we have Wormy, the worm rig. And the first thing that we're doing is we change, as an animator, the number of controls we are using. This alone is already pretty cool. Now watch for these green controls. Those are pin controls. And they kind of define how the rest position is being defined between two of these pin areas. And we can also play with the stretch and stretch behavior. We can also kind of like pin them in world spurs or let them slide along. This is really important for like grab and let go behaviors. And it is incredibly powerful. And you can also see how incredibly robust the twist behavior is and can also be applied to certain subsections. And it's not even tied to those pins. It's its own thing. This is not small stuff. This is really big and opens a lot of options when you think about these complex spline setups. And it simplifies them a lot if you want to experiment with them. Staying in the realm of curves, but coming more to curves and faces, we also really wanted to simplify the workflow for blend shape setups for you guys. And at the same time, we also want to increase the intuitive feel for an animator to work with it. So what are we doing here? We are creating a bunch of curves on the surface. We're feeding it into the blend shape node, and boom, we have a UV slider control. And it feels instantly very haptic, and it feels like it's sticking to the surface. At the same time, it also comes with the side panel layout, which is a dual implementation for the same interface for the animator to choose. And here we have our new pirate friend in action. And you saw already how simple it was to set the setup up. It's a combination of joins and blend shapes and our Apex Room tools all together combined. And you can actually combine these now very quickly. And you can see how these like colorful blobs in a second will pop up. And you can see how they kind of like move along. And that really changes how it feels as an animator when the controls really react to what you're doing. And here we have another example where you can see exactly that behavior. You get that like haptic feel, and you can always switch over to the side panel. The side panel is very often easier to select, but the haptic feel really gives you a different type of behavior. And as you're animating, you can go back and forth as you go, based on your personal preferences. It's actually the same controls, and you can just switch how they're being laid out. And of course, we can go also beyond just pure blend shapes. This is a much more sophisticated setup in terms of like deformers. It has like also lattice implementations and custom rivet solutions, and you can see the like high appeal that you can get out of it. And all this power is already bundled in Apex and ready for you to be explored. So yes, you can already build quite cool facial setups. Talking about faces, of course, also means talking a little bit more of the work that is currently happening on the side of the developers from Epic on the MetaHuman plugin. So the plugin is going to be a very nice way of getting the MetaHuman character with the facial and parts of the body rig logic into Houdini. And of course, from there, you can do whatever you want. You can create your grooms, you can create cloths, you can go to rendering, you can do whatever you want. And here we see the typical MetaHuman facial interface directly in action. And you can also see that we can also transfer the animation over to this. This is, of course, great. And we can see the character does come with the body setup and the typical MetaHuman body deformation that we can also get out of the box. And the whole system is fully compatible with our Autorig Builder. That means you get the whole rig plus the body mechanics all ready for you to be used to get this like highly realistic appeal out of it. And here we see it all playing together.
8 levels of detail and have been tested on a wide range of hardware platforms, from feature film to mobile. 8 levels of detail and have been tested on a wide range of hardware platforms, from feature film to mobile.
So that means for you, all these characters that we see now, be it more realistic, be it more cartoony, they're of course already in the content library for you to be ready and to be explored. And I just very much hope that you guys are going to explore those files and that you're going to create your own characters out of this. And now we're going to have to focus a little bit more on our new friend in the front, in the purple pants, Otto. And I'm handing over to my colleague, Kai.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Esther. I don't have my purple pants today, I'm sorry. I hope that's okay with you guys. I'm here to talk a little bit about all the improvements we have in character effects. And our centerpiece with that is going to be Otis, which is our new soft tissue solver. It's totally specialized for that purpose, and it's fully GPU accelerated, but has FEM-like material quality. In fact, it's very close to FEM, just in a package that is much faster than ever before. And of course, to get you jump-started and ready to use this directly, we have shipped Otto with a full set of production quality muscles, as well as tissue. And this is ready to go right in the software. So to get the results you're seeing here, you're basically putting down our new Otto muscle and tissue simulation recipe and get started with it right away. You basically set a display flag at the end, hit play, and you get this result. And you'll see you'll be able to use this in many ways. And it's not just like an educational example. So this is the type of quality you can expect out of that. You see everything moving very cohesively and reacting naturally, and we can run some pretty challenging simulations out of the box. Important to note, this is really directly out of the recipe. That was really important to us to just show exactly what you're getting. And one important thing with the solver is, and that we're really proud of, we can run muscles and tissue all at once. This is a single simulation, which we're defaulting to. Now, after that muscle and tissue simulation, we have a final step that we implemented as a quasi-static SOP, which is the skin deform SOP that has built-in skin sliding. So this is a secondary step that you can run on top of the simulation. And of course, being quasi-static means it's easily distributed on the farm. You can run it in multiple chunks on the farm, which gives you faster results right away. So on the left, you see the result that you get straight off the muscle and tissue simulation. And then on the right, that's with a quasi-static skin sliding on top. And here you can see, like when the arms move up, you can really see that propagating down all the way to the waistline and getting really nice global effects from that. Now another thing, and really the key thing that makes combined muscle and tissue simulation possible, is the super robust collision detection and response we get from the solver. You see, of course, a lot of material being squished between the muscles in the knee area and the belly resting on the thighs, and everything is just very stable. This is what you can expect out of the box. Yeah, it basically just works and cleanly separates again as he raises up. Here's another typical example that tends to be very challenging. Arms being pushed into the torso, the area under the armpits. That's the nightmare of every CFX artist out there. You can see that all, even if we like cut away and really look into it, it all looks very clean, separates totally cleanly, no problem. Here we go a step further and we use our muscle adjust volume SOP to introduce some artificial intersections. Important to note, the SOP actually supports collision detection, and you don't have to do it with introducing intersections, but this is to show that the solver doesn't have a problem with it. It just pops apart very predictably at the start and then keeps on going, no problem. And of course, this applies just as well to any sort of other characters and is not confined to just auto or bipeds or the things we ship. So this is another character that an experienced CFX artist, Rod, built for us. And it all works just the same. Now, having said that we simulate muscles and tissue together, we also have a faster option that you can use to tweak your initial muscle setup, which is our fascia simulation. So this is basically a quickly generated low resolution TET mesh of just the fascia, which really helps keep the muscles together. And an important aspect of this is that you can keep the muscle material as soft as it's supposed to be. Like, and muscles that haven't been tensed are actually quite soft material, so you want to maintain that for a realistic simulation. And so, but the problem that you see without the fascia is on the right there, the muscles just jiggle about a bit too much and don't move cohesively with the arm animation. And as soon as you add the fascia, that just holds everything together naturally. But the muscles are still able to react individually. And most importantly, it doesn't take a whole lot of setup. It just kind of works out of the box. Here's another look at the simulation geometry we generate with these setups. So the blue stuff here is basically the fascia that I just talked about. And that's all generated automatically by the new Tissue Solidify SOP. And this permeates throughout the muscle and bone geometry that you see here and attaches to the bones. So this is the part of the geometry that kind of moves the simulation geometry with your bone animation, and then allows the green layer, which is the fat tissue essentially, to slide on top and move realistically. We also ship with some other valuable modeling components like the muscle adjust volume SOP that I mentioned before. We use it here to make some adjustments to the model. And it can also really help you improve the tetrahedralization quality in thin areas of the muscles where you can just enforce a minimum thickness. And combined with a skin deform SOP, we can actually use it to model and change the character. Now, muscle activation is a thing that you previously had to spend a lot of time on to just get the basic results out. And it's always been a bit laborious to set up. So this is something that we really wanted to focus on workflow-wise to get that speeded up a bit. And there are some massive improvements there. So first of all, we're really switching away from hand-drawn, like meticulously placed tension lines, which are responsible for activation. And we just have a procedural tool with muscle auto tension lines that generates these automatically. And importantly, they are basically just a line per muscle, which makes everything a bit easier to think about and manage. And that just plugs directly into a default muscle flex SOP with no changes at all. You just put it down. And when you hit play, you get basic working activation, where you previously had to manually link all the tension lines to the muscles. It's just no longer needed at all. But of course, at the same time, we wanted to improve the customizability and the control you have over these muscles. So by separating out the muscle activation to a separate procedural SOP that has a similar interface to muscle properties and muscle constraint properties nodes, where you first set general properties for all muscles and then individually go in and make changes to individual muscles. And because we no longer have to display all the muscles in one big multi-param interface, we're free to add a few more parameters and actually give you more control, like fall-off bias and even like ramp-based activation. You'll find it's easier to use and while having a lot more control. And this then all feeds into the Otis configure SOP, which actually produces the constraints that the solver understands. And this is basically the place where you can see that all in one go. You can see the various constraints we have available there, basically like muscle to keep the abdominal muscles tied to one another, and then muscle to tissue, which really help. Those are the yellow lines connecting the surface. Those really help getting a lot of the action that you actually want to see from the muscle system visible on the top layer, on the tissue and skin, where we always previously recommended like reducing the rest scale and shrinking in the model, but that's always problematic when you have an approved model that you don't want to change the look of. Now, here's another character we will ship as a content library example. You see him a bit more later. This is Brute, and we'll also use him to show some of the other CFX features we have. So, of course, it would be a shame if all the work we did on auto was locked away with auto and you couldn't use it anywhere else. So the whole idea of having that character fully set up is that you're able to transfer all this data to other characters easily. And that's why we ship a full muscle transfer, not just SOP, a full tool set for various adjustments you might have to make there. So here you see that we first transfer the bone geometry over, and then that plugs into the actual muscle transfer that produces the muscle geometry. And basically by just plugging two recipes together, which is the auto muscle and tissue simulation and the muscle transfer, you essentially hit play on that and you get a simulation like this. Now, of course, you may still want to make tweaks and adjust settings, but you get a basic working new character with full muscle setup right away. And our plan is also to expand our library of production quality characters like that in the future. And this also works on much more extreme examples like this. So here we're blending a cat to a cow, and we picked this kind of weird Brahman cow, I think it's called, not by accident because it has some extra challenges. So you'll see there are some areas like that hump at the top that we don't actually want the muscles to transfer into. And we have some additional tools to easily take care of those things. And because we're doing this as a two-step process where we first transfer the bone geometry, you can kind of insert things in between and make tweaks to the bone geometry first, and the muscle transfer SOP just takes care of constraining that on the interior and keeping everything aligned, keeping the muscles attached. And of course, that's really important because, of course, the bone geometry needs to line up very exactly with the rig itself. And you can go even further with these surface-based tools where you can shift the muscles around and keep everything, basically line the muscle model up with the actual shapes that you have in the renderable model. Now here's just another few examples. We made some changes to Otto. On the left, he let himself go a bit. On the right, he actually, I think, has a pretty good workout plan. On the left, the model is actually just hand modeled. And we transferred the muscles into that. And on the right, we actually used the approach that I was explaining before, where we combine the muscle adjust volume SOP and the skin deform SOP to make some changes. So there's no hand modeling, and it's really a fun combination to play with, actually, to make some changes. Now here's another variant of essentially another CFX pipeline you can use when you don't want to use like a full muscle and tissue setup. This is armature capture and armature deform, which automatically binds your mesh to a skeleton in a resolution independent way, so it's independent of the render mesh resolution, and produces much higher quality results than a basic bone deform. So this is a very low barrier of entry, no specific CFX knowledge required kind of deformer, and It's also ideal to plug into our ML train deformer setup, which is another recipe we ship, which you can use to train a model that gives you this kind of result. Here's the progress of the ML training over time, converging on a nice result. And here we're comparing the basic bone deform with the result of that. And you can see, even when it's not in motion, just the volume preservation and the quality of the deformation, even a simple character like this, is just a lot nicer. But of course, we can also do ML training with our full CFX setup. So here's an example of that on Auto. So this model actually ships with Auto. And you can try that out directly in Apex Scene Animate. On the left here, we have a bunch of basically random generated poses that are actually simulated. And on the right, you can see the ML model training and reducing the error basically down to nothing. Where, the ML model faithfully represents what we see in the simulation. And importantly, these models are incredibly easy to add to your Apex character. So if you have a Apex character all rigged and ready, you basically just add ML deform sub, plug in the blend shapes that the training outputs, and as well as the model, and you get this. And basically on a fast machine right now, you can run these at like 40 frames per second with a full deformation. And you can see that you go from something that just feels like a basic bone deform to something really nicely volume preserving and feeling really fleshy and realistic, especially when you go into fairly extreme or just difficult poses. We find it works especially well on something like the torso, where you just have a lot of volume that is really far away from the joint chain itself. And just moving this around with the ML model, you never get the feeling that you're actually getting into such an extreme pose, but then when you turn it back off, you often see things like that just don't work that well with a basic bone deform. And now all these CFX setups, of course, work a lot better, and you get really nice results from them, but we have no illusions. There will also always be need for shot sculpt and additional tweaks. And to talk about that, let's get Scott onto the stage.
All right, thanks, Kai. So yeah, let's just get right to it. So as Kai said, inevitably there's going to be fixes that need to happen where maybe you could go back to simulation and fix them, but oftentimes it's faster to just fix them now rather than send them backward in the pipeline. So in this example, we're taking this disturbing flesh orb and sculpting it to fix some of these mistakes that can happen either rig-based or sim-based. And we're using this NLE workflow that you saw in the MotionBix, or where we have this timeline and these essentially clips, but in this case, the clips are actually sculpts over time. So you can go to a frame, sculpt a fix on that pose, and then use these clips, and you can see the curves there in the animation editor showing how they can blend in and out over time. So it's a fast way to basically sculpt over time. And this is sort of sitting on top of some of the sculpting workflow nodes that we used, that we created in the last version of Houdini. So it gives you a lot of control to make fixes across time, blend them in and out, and make any sort of adjustments you need to final whatever your geometry. Probably not a weird flesh orb. So let's take a look at another example here where this is obviously a very simple thing happening here. We have a cube and we've used the quad remesher to make another cube from it. But the reason we're showing that is that one of the difficulties with remeshing is that you want to keep those sharp edges, but you also want to keep the interior quads not sort of distorted, right? You want to align as much as possible to the actual topology of the input. And you can see as we continue to improve the quad remesher, we're getting better and better results. And that's also true for organic shapes. So on the left, we have a sculpt done in Houdini of another weird creature. And then on the right, the quad remeshed example where, again, we're really focusing on getting that nice edge flow of the topology that follows the curvature of the objects and has nice even topology, but also adaptive topology. So, polygons closer together on sharp details, further apart on flat or softer details. So let's take a look at just another example that kind of mixes two of those things together. So in this case, we have this creature that's sort of part chest, part puppy, and it has hard features and soft features. And when we do a very high resolution, about 100,000 polygons remesh, you can see we capture the detail nicely. We get pretty nice edge flow, especially where it's following these organic forms, but then also sticking nicely to the edges of the sharper forms on the sort of body, the hard surface aspects of this character. And it holds up as we reduce the number of polygons, where it becomes more difficult to arrange these quads to continually follow this shape. All the way down to about 10K, where you're still getting a pretty good edge flow, nice clean topology overall, and again, it's matching most of the features, which is really, really awesome. But let's take a look sort of at an opposite example, where maybe somebody has modeled something, and in the process of your pipeline, it's become subdivided multiple times. Maybe this was the quad remeshed example, and they've subdivided a bunch of times. And when you get it, you're like, I don't need it to be as subdivided as this. So the unsubdivide SOP allows you to reverse those algorithms. In this case, it's the Catmull-Clark subdivision, and we're taking that and reversing it. We're using that assumption that you've subdivided in a certain way, and then we can remove that subdivision. We can even go further than that. We can go beyond the amount of subdivision, but the results become a little bit unpredictable then, because it's not necessarily actually a subdivided piece of geometry anymore, but still really useful for pipelines where, again, you don't want to throw something back to somebody else to get something redone. And all of this is kind of building to being able to procedurally generate complex pieces of geometry with nice topology, and then maybe even send it into Copernicus to do texturing. So here we're just showing a sort of a high-res sculpt of this sort of rocky feature. In the middle there, we've done a quad remesh to give it a nice smooth topology. And then on the right, we've textured it. But there's a missing piece, which is the UVs for this stuff. So how do we add UVs? Well, let's just take a look at sort of a classic HDA here. We have this little network that you see on the right, and all it's doing is generating these random high-resolution, really dense rock objects. We're going to quad remesh them to give you a nice smooth result. And now we need to add UVs to these. And we already have a bunch of tools for doing UVs, but this is a really interesting new one, where what we do is we locate points on the surface. And in this example, we're just going to create a group that randomly picks points. And then we're going to feed them into the new UV flatten from points node. And basically what this does is, for every point, it kind of grows the UVs outward along the surface to help unwrap it. So in this example, we're just randomly choosing points, but you could purposefully select them, if there's features that are troublesome, maybe like pointy features, things like that. Or you can plug in your own point cloud on the second input there to guide the unwrapping. And so we're able to now quickly, produce high-res geometry and low-res geometry with nice topology and nice UVs across all these examples. So then obviously the next step is, well, we want to add some shading to this, but we don't want to just throw away the high-res information. We want to keep it. We want to use that downstream for texturing or other purposes. So that means that we need to do a baking process. We need to bake those high-res details into maybe texture maps. So for Houdini 21, we've completely revamped our baking workflow, both using Karma and using a COP-based approach. And they actually share a GPU accelerated ray tracing library to make this very fast and robust, and also make sure the outcomes are very similar between the two methods. So let's take a quick look here. So we're going to start out with sort of the humble crate, the most common asset in film and video games. Here's just a simple asset where I can change the number of planks and the size of the crate. But it also outputs this extremely low-res version of the crate. So now inside of Copernicus, we're going to use a recipe that just lets you pick the low-res mesh, the high-res mesh, and the cage mesh, which we'll come to in a minute. And so now we have an environment where we can do that baking and see the result in the viewport really quickly. So let's put down a preview material, and we'll just hook up the geometry as well as the normal map and the occlusion. And you'll see it immediately updating in the viewport. And as I'm connecting this, it's doing the baking. So you're seeing the baking happening as I build this network. So it's, again, we're focused on having a very robust baker, but also a very fast baker. So if I jump back up now and show these assets side by side, you can see the baked result on the right, using all texture maps for the detail, and the high res on the left. And as I go to the asset and change the size and shape, the bake is updating almost immediately as I do that. And this is nice that it's fast, but also means that as you're debugging your baking, you have very hands-on approach. You can really see exactly what's happening. It makes it a lot easier to deal with any problems. We're also outputting all the maps that you would expect. There's actually more than this, but your normal, your position, your world normal, your curvature, your edges, your height, all the things that you would expect from a baker to be able to preserve details downstream through texture maps. So let's take a quick look here at like a more complicated example. So on the left, we have this atomic vacuum cleaner, I guess, and it is very dense, has a lot of detail, small details, rivets, little edges, fins, texture, and so on. And then on the right, a very low-res version of it where we've basically stripped out all of the detail and just really left the silhouette. And here on the left, we have the high-res, again, now lit in the Vulkan viewport, and on the right, using just ambient occlusion and the tangent space normal map on the low-res mesh. And you can see that they're almost indistinguishable from each other, which is really the whole purpose of this baking process. So I mentioned the cage mesh earlier, and we can automatically create a cage mesh for you. And the cage just helps you modify the positions of the rays so that they don't intersect in ugly ways. But we can also modify the mesh directly. So you can provide your own cage mesh. I'm going to just jump up here and select a few faces on the cage and just pull them out. And as I do, you'll see the bake update, right? And I'm fixing the errors by manually adjusting the cage. And so this means you have all the power of SOPs to modify your cage in any useful way to fix errors, even automatically by detecting collisions. And so because it's quick, you can also do it interactively and see the result, making it a lot faster to debug your scenes and also get really nice results at the other end. And so, okay, now we've done that work. We have these various maps. What would we use them for? So just as an example, we're going to use the new triplanar COP to add texture maps to this. And we're just using the normal and the position to do this. And so we just start with a checkerboard, but we can put any texture map we want on here. And you see we get nice blending across all the seams because it's using this triplanar technique. And this node is also set up to allow you to change the texture map per axis. So in this case, we're just using the stone and metal and brick textures. But of course, you could use whatever you like those rock examples earlier with snow on the top. And you can also control individually the scale, rotation, and offset of each axis map as well. But suppose you're coming from the other side. You actually have a high-res mesh with a complicated set of materials, maybe multiple materials on it. Well, the Karma baker, which is a CPU-based baker, but again, shares that GPU backend for ray tracing for baking, can actually evaluate materials. So Karma baker is able to look at the base color and the specular roughness and bake those as well. So now you also have a pipeline for reducing the complexity of assets. Let's say you have a very complicated set of shaders and they're slow to render because they're doing a lot of things. Well, you can bake all that information, if it's a Material X shader, down to a very simple set of texture maps. So you're drastically reducing the complexity of your assets, ideally without losing really any of the fidelity. So in the theme of rebuilding things from scratch, as Cristin mentioned, we're going to take a look at the new erosion toolset. So really this is taking all the ideas we had for erosion and building them again from the ground up. So here's an example of this rocky terrain that was eroded using heightfields and then textured using Copernicus. And again, it outputs all of the bits and pieces you would expect. And actually, interestingly, even though this lives in SOPs as a height field tool, it is built on a core of Copernicus. Copernicus is actually doing the work internally. So you can imagine in the future a workflow where more and more of this height field work actually completely happens inside of Copernicus. But for the moment, we're keeping it as a height field tool. So we had a couple of goals with this. One was to get higher quality erosion. The other was to make it very fast. And the other one is to simplify the interface. So here you can see I'm scrubbing the erosion feature size, and we're getting different erosions automatically as I'm doing it. You're seeing it update live in the viewport. And this is really important because obviously fast is good, but it also means that you can play around with the different parameters, see what they do in real time as you're changing them, so you can more intuitively learn what all of these parameters are doing. You can also see that we've drastically reduced the complexity of the erosion solver itself. There's far fewer parameters. They do more intuitive things when you change them. Also, every input or every parameter there you can see has a mask option. So just in this quick example, we're going to just use height field patterns to create a ramp across the geometry. We'll plug that in and we'll use that in the erodibility parameter. And so as I change that ramp now, you can see going from left to right, the erosion changing across the terrain as we go. So just to be clear, we're not just blending from uneroded to eroded, we're changing the amount of erosion in those areas. So it still is doing the erosion, it's just modifying basically like how strong the rock is in a way. But it does this in a single pass. It does an erosion with a certain feature size. And the design here is that you can then chain these together. So if you imagine doing this first erosion, and maybe this is like millions of years ago, right? Like this is like massive erosion over an enormous amount of time. You know, and then the second one is maybe, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years or something along those lines. And then as you tweak these and you use finer and finer feature sizes, you get more and more control over the look. So you can tweak and get those really super fine details. And because it's this staged approach, you can intervene at any time. You could put a distortion in between the, you know, the million years and the 100,000 years to drastically change. Maybe something drastic happened over that time period. But really, at the end, means that you have a lot of artistic control over every step of the erosion process. The other thing we wanted to do is make sure that now that we have Copernicus and we have this new erosion model, let's make sure it's easier to get into Copernicus. So you can see now in 21, when you import height fields, they still look like height fields in Copernicus. And that makes it a lot easier to work with. But it also means you can continue to modify it, because at the end of the day, a height field is essentially a texture map. So you can do things like add this sort of stratification to your terrain just by adding some noise to the height. Or maybe you want to bring in a texture map, you know, and change the colors based on the height as well. And so you can very quickly get to a result that looks kind of like this, where you've really nicely textured it in Copernicus. You have control over, you know, the sediment, all of the outputs from the erosion solver gives you, plus all of the tool sets inside of Copernicus that let you do things like calculate curvature, use ambient occlusion. You know, there's a multitude of tools that bridge the gap between the two workflows. So Cristin mentioned you know, ML and building tools that take advantage of it. And here's one that we showed a long time ago, I think, an example of an ML terrain tool. This is a brand new one based on the new erosion model, all trained using that model, and also all trained inside of Houdini using networks and tools like style transfer tools and a PDG network that allows you to do this yourself. So you can train your own height field neural paint tool that allows you quickly paint a terrain. And you can see I can change the terrain preset there, which is really going between differently trained models, you know, different types of rock in this example. So again, you could add your own models into this tool. And maybe you just want to use this as a starting point, because it is a single pass of erosion that has been trained. So if you want to, you can obviously take this and then do further erosions, further texturing downstream. And a nice side effect of all this having been done in Copernicus is that these terrains are also tileable. So you can sort of create larger terrains just by tiling the same terrain seamlessly over a large distance and texturing them in Copernicus. And of course, we did mention that, you know, it's a neural terrain paint, but you don't actually have to paint. You can feed in height, and it will add the erosion directly onto, you know, whatever you feed into it. So it is a procedural tool at the end of the day, using this ML logic, the algorithm, to, you know, create this first pass of erosion really rapidly. So okay, you've got your terrain, and now what? Well, the SideFX Labs has this amazing set of tools, these biome tools. Here it's rendered in Karma. And the biome tools basically have the goal of saying, like, you want to define a series of rules for how things appear on your terrain. You know, how the plants grow, where they grow, what types of plants grow where, and how do they interact with each other. And it's designed to have sort of a very artist-friendly interface so that you can basically give in almost any terrain and then use these tools and these intuitive sort of handles to define things like what types of things grow where, what types of biomes are being adjusted. Things like, you know, can the shrubs grow close to the trunks of the trees, but trees can't grow too close to each other. You know, what type of terrain it is. And then an enormous amount of data that you can use to modify things further, store these as like rule sets essentially, and then use them in other other contexts. And this gives you like a ton of ways to interact with your terrain in a nice procedural way. So here's an example of the same tool set being used in Unreal Engine 5, being all rendered here. So all the assets you're seeing, the plants, the trees, those kinds of things are all handled by real biomes. They've provided the assets for us. But the height field erosion, the splat maps, and all the placement logic comes through the Biomes Labs tool. And you can see, you get this really believable environment because it's sort of based on these logical sort of real world rules. But as Cristin mentioned earlier, we're also working on the Vulkan viewport, pushing it to be a production-ready environment, which it really is now because we've updated most of the lighting scenarios. It's the default tool, viewport tool in Houdini now. It has things like ray trace shadows. And in this case, we're showing the physical sky. You can see the sun going by there, as well as uniform fog. And the goal here, again, is to just get you to the point that when you're working in Houdini, you can really get a high fidelity result that lets you know if what you're doing is looking the way you're going to expect it to, whether you're exporting it somewhere else or going to Karma. Especially nice seeing like the fog give a realistic bloom, over the sun and occluding the sky, for this hazy kind of effect. We've also improved ambient occlusion in the viewport. You can see here we get a nice screen space ambient occlusion, but we can also turn on a ray trace version of ambient occlusion in the viewport and denoise it. And this gives you a much more realistic ambient occlusion in the viewport. You can see the interior of those mugs, for instance, being darkened really believably, whereas the screen space one, while it looks nice, can't really do some of those more believable effects. It's more of a view-based effect. But the ray trace version gives you a really believable result, and you can work with it in real time while you're setting up your scene and detecting shadows or contact points. We also have this feature called work lights, which allows you to automatically turn on preset types of lights in the viewport for dome lights and things like that. And also the ability to instance lights. So there's like 50 lights or something in this scene, all being lit nicely. And again, using ray tracing for the lights, shadows, ambient occlusion, and so on. So we didn't stop there. There's other really interesting things on the horizon, and one of them being Gaussian Splats or G-Splats. So here what you're seeing is a point cloud representation of a G-Splat scan of this fountain, which somebody has sort of planted these flowers in. At the core of this technology, really, a G-Splat is really a bunch of points with a bunch of data on the points. So here you're seeing the G-Splat as points with color data on it. But we also have a G-Splat baker/renderer that lets you actually show them in the viewport as real G-Splats with all the opacity, lighting, and so on that you would expect here. So you see things nicely occluding. You're seeing almost a photorealistic recreation of this 3D scene. But like I said, at the end of the day, G-Splats are points, which means that you can select them, you can move them around, you can edit them. It's not just a static scene. You can do things with it. So here again, we're modifying the point cloud data, and then we're going to switch over to the G-Splat renderer /shader and show the adjusted result. And even though we've moved it, you can even see the kind of hole in the ground where it was originally sitting. It still integrates really nicely into the environment. It looks very believable. And this is sort of cutting edge technology inside of Houdini right now. It's literally being updated right now. You can see we've already pushed this to have a higher frame rate for larger scenes. So this will show up in an early production build of Houdini 21 with all these new enhancements, including large scale scenes like this city Gaussian splat that is very large, has a lot of information in it. And we're just going to keep pushing this and making it more robust over time so you can get your hands on it in the very near future. And of course, since at the end of the day, it's a three-dimensional scene, you can go ahead and do things like put three-dimensional objects in the scene. And you can see that when we place Crag, in this case, in the flower bed, he sits correctly in depth. He sits behind the things you would expect him. He sits properly in 3D space, which is really nice. That means you can start thinking about, well, how do we integrate this technology into maybe other parts of our pipeline? How can we use this potentially in rendering? Which actually brings us to our next speaker, Chris, who's going to talk a little bit about G-Splats as well as Karma.
Hey everyone, I don't know why I'm adjusting this, but I just did. I'm excited to share a little bit of what we've been working on for the last year as far as Solaris and Karma goes in Houdini 21. We put a lot of work into it. We're only scratching the surface. A lot of the features are behind the scenes, Solaris being built on USD. There's a lot of changes that have been happening in the USD library. We're using version 2505, and we've also updated to Material X. But on top of all of that, we worked really hard to, and we are continuing to work hard to make Solaris better for you. I know that sounds maybe cliche or like kind of obvious, but we're trying to tighten that iteration loop. There's a lot of things that go into production. And I could see, grizzled veterans here and some bushy, bright-eyed students as well. Maybe don't know all of the difficulties that come with working in production, but we want that loop to be tight. We want it to be fast and as enjoyable as possible. So as Scott said, G-Splats have been on our radar for a while. And in Houdini 21, we're shipping some alpha preview technology in that Karma XPU will be rendering G-Splats. Look for a lot of changes to be coming in this space over the next probably the next year. There's efforts going on in the community to standardize how G-Splats are described, particularly in USD. Speaking of preview technology, one of the hardest parts of adopting USD is how do we structure a project? How do we build our layers? What is the way to do it? And there are often multiple answers to that. So in Houdini 21, we're shipping the Shop Builder tools. This is a beta tool set that brings a suite of nodes that makes multi-shot work easier and provides some opinions and structure for you on how to build a USD project. Another key piece of this is an asset resolver. This asset resolver provides some level of versioning. It's not a full version control system, but some level of versioning to make collaboration in smaller studios or projects easier. And also working under certain conditions with shared drives and file locking and so forth. But all of this is in service of, again, tightening your iteration loops, your ability to work together, and to not get too hung up on needing to have large development resources to get up and running with USD. Again, this is beta level stuff for Houdini 21, but we're really excited about the potential here and how it's going to hopefully open up USD and Solaris to more and more artists and studios. Now, on that vein of making life easier in Solaris, we know that USD is capable of building complex environments and scenes. And in Houdini 21, the SiGGRAPH tree has an expansion effect feature now, where draw mode can be driven by the expansion state of your scene. We've also improved the SiGGRAPH tree to show a little bit more information more clearly. Which prims are instanced, which ones have maybe a lot of child prims that might have some performance implications. All of this to try to make it faster for you to, at a glance, understand what's going on in your scene. Now, this render, there's a lot going on here. We're going to talk a little bit about that over the next few minutes, and then for Scott, when we hand it back, when I hand back the mic to talk about Copernicus, we often are trying to render things with variation, right? Things that with complexity, which comes with the trade-off of some overhead. One of the things that we've done to make rendering foliage, or in this case, playing cards easier, is stencil maps. And stencil maps are an alternative to opacity shading. Opacity shading in a path tracer comes with some performance overhead, but stencil maps are a lot faster, a lot more efficient, 25% faster. We also can see here some intricate patterns that are coming from texture maps that were produced using some of the new reaction diffusion stuff in Copernicus. But we've also got some Primvar driven textures as well that we'll talk about here shortly. But the shading model that was on those cards and this car is something we're excited to announce for Houdini 21, and that is OpenPBR surface support in Karma CPU, Karma XPU, and the Vulkan Viewport. This is arriving as part of upgrading Material X, and you have this beautiful, awesome Uber shader that is starting to really take its place out in the industry. On that note of OpenPBR, some of you have probably seen the announcements already, but we're excited to share the OpenPBR volume. In the same family of OpenPBR specifications, OpenPBR volume is designed to be another industry standard volumetric shading option. And so we've taken what we've learned through years of the Pyro shader and working with some industry partners. We are working on getting this into a more public usable state, so look for more updates in the future. Now, prim bars. I mentioned prim bars and texture maps. We're really excited that through some updates on our end in Houdini 21 and contributions to MaterialX, you can now drive texture maps with prim bars. This lets you do something like, if you've got rubber duckies that are all yellow, you can give them a little variety, maybe computer graphics inside joke with the color scheme there. But we know this has been a long requested, long awaited, some might say long suffered, journey to get to this point, but we're grateful that you've been along for the ride and are excited to deliver this for you. Now, on that note of cool shaders, we have a new ray switch, a Karma ray switch shader. This lets you, within your material, drive properties using the different rays that Karma is firing. Primary rays, things that have nothing in front of them that the camera can see directly, or secondary rays, diffuse bounces, reflections, refractions, all of this is available. Here we're just using a more colorful scheme to illustrate, but you could use it for more artistic purposes as well. But we're really, really excited that Houdini 21 finally puts this ray switch shader in your hands. Now, one of the things you can do with the ray switch shader, apart from giving things a different color, is mix materials. Material mixing is a hot topic. It's a common way that we work to get different looks, right, in production. And we're excited that in Houdini 21, Karma XPU can now mix up to 16 surface shaders. These need to be the same surface model, but in addition to standard surface and unlit surface, for example, OpenPBR, of course, is also supported. And here we're using the Karma ray switch to change between this gold metallic surface or our kind of checkered painted look based on the reflections or the object reflecting off of that little mirror. Now, glass and water, transmission, this is a tricky medium sometimes to render and work with. And in Houdini 21, we have a new feature in Karma, limit color. And limit color lets you give Karma something other than just black to return when it hits its ray limit. This is useful for debugging why you might be seeing some weird artifact. But the thing that excites me most is you could use it as an alternative to just cranking your ray limits. So instead of spending exponentially more time to resolve fewer and fewer pixels, you can just give it a plausible color and hide the mess, and I shouldn't say mess, hide the artifacts and move on. So this is really cool. Out of the box, it's just reflection and refraction, but you could change it to apply to any ray types. Another shader that's seen some updates is our fur shader. We've enhanced it to make wet fur easier. And here we've got this beautiful shot of a bear wading through the river. Now, switching gears from maybe more photoreal or conventional rendering, in Houdini 21, Karma CPU has some new outline rendering capabilities. This is kind of a first crack at it, but we're excited for this to get into your hands. This gives you a way to render outlines on objects in your scene, whether to give it a kind of a schematic look, to integrate it with some other stylized toon project, or to combine with a more traditional kind of photoreal rendering to get some stylized looks. Here we have a little demo of applying these geometry properties. And because it's a geometry property, you can vary it. Sometimes different settings will look better as Karma has to figure out where to put the lines. So you can change it and tweak it based on the topology. Or you could use it to maybe accentuate and hit story points visually in your shots. Not only is it configurable on a per object basis, but you can change things like the color or other properties in the shader. So there are AOVs, render vars, that are involved in this process, and you have access to customizing and tweaking those within the material. Again, this is just the first delivery of this outlines feature, but we're excited. It's got a bright future. Now, in Solaris, we have stuff that's moving. We've seen a lot of really cool animation work from the characters teams with KineFX and Apex. And when you get into Solaris, sometimes you need to inspect that animation. The SIGGRAPH details, anybody that's been using Solaris for very long has gotten to know it pretty well. And we've enhanced it in Houdini 21 so that not only can you see when a property has time samples, but you can inspect those time samples. You can see how many there are, and you can look at all of the values that have been authored to the stage. This is key for debugging motion blur issues or just trying to figure out why something does or doesn't look correct. But we are excited that this is one of those small but mighty improvements to your day-to-day workflow. Now, to that point that we mentioned earlier about improving your iteration throughput and being able to have that tight loop of work and getting feedback, we've got some changes to the render gallery that we are excited to reveal to you. First is this new live render lop that lets you render to the render gallery. The viewport is great, but sometimes you kind of want an image to work with. And so you can render to the render gallery live just like you would to the viewport. And the render gallery now has features like this render region. The live render is important, and being able to render this render gallery is important because you often need to have as close to the final frame result as you can. You don't want to have different settings or things accidentally leak out into the farm or into the pipeline. So this live render lop gives you a safe space where if you need to change the quality or change settings, you can. The render gallery also now lets you import images from disk for diffing or for comparing with reference, maybe previous renders. But all of this, again, designed to make your work loop tight, make it fast, and make sure that we're helping as much as we can. Now, we've had emissive shaders and emissive support in Karma since the beginning, but USD has some new changes where you can decorate primitives with emissive shaders, and they become actual lights that you can light link and work with, which is powerful and awesome, and the geometry lop exposes that. And on that note of exposing powerful features, in Solaris, we've had the ability to turn SOP points into primitives for a long time, but we've exposed a more artist-friendly node for it, the USD configure prims from points SOP. It's a long name for an awesome tool, and it lets you set up prims, give them properties, in this case a bunch of lights, to fill out the lighting in our scene. Here is a beautiful render using a lot of these techniques we've been talking about, especially the emissive geometry. Now, part of that loop is we often need to do post-rendering work. And sometimes saving to disk, rendering to disk is kind of a drag, right? You don't want to do that. So we've given the file cop this live rendering capability as well. So it can pull in pixels off of this, rendered from the stage, rendered from LOPs, into your Copernicus network. You could use this if you're working on a stylized project or some other use case similar to SlapComp perhaps. Maybe just layering plates, adding some annotated information, whatever the case may be, but you can do it live while your render is going in case you need to tweak in Copernicus, go back into Solaris, adjust render settings, and so forth. Now, this idea of decorating your images was introduced previously as SlapComp. And we've added to that with this new exciting iteration of that called image filters. And you might be familiar with this kind of concept as like post effects or render effects. But this lets you decorate and tweak your images live coming out of the viewport in a way similar to SlapComp, but an easier way to work. You can reorder them, you can enable and disable them, but you get these canned image filter effects that are all powered by Copernicus. There's nothing different or fancy about them. And you can apply them to your Karma or other render because it's just operating on pixels. Now, these show up obviously in the viewport, they show up in MPlay and in the render gallery, but you might want to bake these in. You might want to apply them at the render time. And so the USD render op allows you to designate image filters to apply at render time. And with that, we'll pass it to the inestimable Scott Keating.
All right, thank you, Chris. Okay, so Copernicus, we have added a lot of features to Copernicus. So let's just dive right in. We'll start off with the live video cop. Here we have one of our developers doing a wonderful performance while we are modifying the live video stream from his webcam to do various live effects in Copernicus. And we'll talk about a couple of these in a minute here, but basically we're taking that live video and streaming it directly into Copernicus. Now this is kind of a neat tool for adding these kind of live filters. In this case, the surface dither node here you're seeing. But you can imagine this as sort of the first step of generally getting video into Copernicus if you imagine a world where in the future maybe we're doing camera tracking and things along those lines. But for the moment, it's a cool sort of experimental tool to play around with these live filter capabilities. But let's take a look at one of the nodes that we were showing there, the scatter shapes cop. So this is a tool that lets you basically scatter images into your image plane. In the previous release, we had something called stamp points, which was a much lower level sort of utility node that let you kind of build these types of tools. But this is a much higher level tool with all the sort of standard controls that you would expect as an artist. But it's using a new algorithm to make it really fast, so you can create thousands and thousands of these stamps very quickly and adjust them very rapidly. But you can see we can quickly populate a scene with stamps with various changes to them. We're also introducing something called cables in Copernicus. So in this case, we're taking those 3 stamps, we're packing them together into a cable, and we're taking the output of those images, the image layers, and sending them downstream. So you can see we can pick from within that cable to randomize the results in the scatter shapes node. But it's more than that. These images that are sort of packed in, they're bundled up in inside these cables, these layers, can be adjusted all at once. So you can see we're feeding into 3 images, transforming them all at the same time, recoloring them all at the same time. So a cable can operate something like a for each loop automatically just by connecting them to a node. This allows you to really vastly simplify your network, but also makes your network much more flexible because you can just update what is being packed into the cable and have everything downstream operate on the full bundle of image layers. And scatter shapes, of course, it has all the parameters you would expect, but it can also take image layers as inputs to modify your stamps, whether it's the orientation, you can change the offset and the position of all of the stamps. You can also modify things like the scale, of course, and even pick which stamp is being used. So you can choose very specifically using an input layer. And of course, obviously, you can color each stamp and color correct each stamp as well, add randomization on top of it. And this allows you to start thinking about this as creating these really interesting, designy, motion graphics-y sort of imagery. But it can also be used, in a much more fundamental way to add things like dings and scratches to the surfaces of things. So in this case, we're creating this sort of painted, scratched metal effect by scattering these scratch textures over the image plane. Or maybe it's overlapping series of leaves or grass with these flowers sitting on top. Or maybe something much more realistic where we create layers and layers of density here, small pebbles, pine needles, little sticks, stones to build up a very sort of realistic texture map just by, again, taking all those stamps and adding them on top of each other. So speaking of sort of utility nodes, here we have rasterized curves, and this allows us to take curve geometry and turn it into an image. So we're just drawing a curve here quickly, and then we're rasterizing that down to an image. We have a bunch of controls for how you can adjust this and what you can get from the curve. So just as a quick example here, we're just going to add some custom attributes. We'll just add a width attribute, and we'll go ahead and just adjust the size of the curve by using SOP attributes. Or we can add color as another example, and then add that as a custom attribute back up on the rasterized curve node. So you can see we can just add a new input, set it to custom, which is the name of the attribute, and now we pick up the color. But much like scatter shapes, we want to also give you a very artist-friendly high-level version of this. So we have layer from curves, which again, takes that basic functionality and wraps it up with more simplified parameters to give you fast results. So here we're able to resample the curve, changes width. We use all these ramps to give you a lot of control over the scale, the color across the width of the curve, color along the length of the curve, and you can apply these presets. And then we also have Curve 3D here as the input in this case. And this is actually the same as our SOP level tool, but now implemented in Copernicus, sharing the same interactive Python state as the SOP level tool. But because Copernicus is a 2D, 3D hybrid, you can see I can move those points in 3D and affect how the curves overlap each other. So that makes it a very intuitive way to create complicated patterns rather than trying to adjust things by changing the height across the curve. We can also generate UVs on these curves. So in this case, just a simple checkerboard pattern is being added there. But you can see that we can rasterize the curve into a space with UV. So we've added this checkerboard texture. You can see it being sampled on the bottom right there in the network, which again opens up a lot of possibilities of what you're putting across this curve. It's not just colors, it can actually be images. Here's just a cool example one of our developers did of using some of these techniques just to create this sort of synthwave line network that just looks really cool, really interesting. But there's more than that. We also have an ability to scatter stamps on curves. So much like the generic sort of image scatter we have, this allows you to do a similar operation along curves. So again, a high-level wrapper that lets you control all the things you would expect to be able to control. Again, using cable pack to feed in multiple different stamps into the network. And that all of these tools together start building up to allow you to do really interesting things. So here's an example where we used rasterized geometry on a real 3D geometry link of chain. We've rasterized that to get the normal information, so you can see it looks realistically lit here. And we're using the scatter on curves tool to place them along the link, even though this is a fully flat image. This is just a texture map at the end of the day, but we're combining all these techniques to give you this very believable, almost three-dimensional looking image, which can be really useful when you're trying to do certain texture maps for props that have, ropes, chains, anything along those, all along those lines. Obviously, you can do things like growing patterns as well. Here, vines combining the layer from curves and the scatter on curves tools. And you can combine them even more to create really interesting texture maps that almost seem like sim-like in their movement as this sort of snake motif slides along this mosaic and seems to push the tiles aside. But all of this just being driven by image layers in Copernicus. There's no simulation happening here. It's all being driven from the set of nodes that I just described to give you this sort of realistic moving texture map. Or maybe you want to go completely the other direction, just like hyper stylized rendering, where we're combining again points, scatter shapes, scatter on curves to create this really interesting, I don't know, 80s style? I'm not sure. Neon crag. we've also added some more fundamental nodes that will just help you get interesting looks, like in this case, phaser noise, which is a new type of noise that gives you this wave-like patterns, really useful for things like waves, or in this case, these desert-like ripples. We also want to make sure that you're not always starting from scratch, so we're including a library of grunge maps that will very soon be actually included in Houdini, so expect them very quickly in the next production build, and also a content library of pre-built materials to help you either just use out of the box if you like, but also as a place to start and learn how to do these kinds of effects inside of Copernicus. Everything from these materials for rock and so on, or more organic things like these tree barks, which again are really beautiful, really realistic examples, many of which use some of the techniques we already talked about. So let's say you've gone and done this. You have your various textures, in this case kind of a cobblestone texture. Well, now we can use Houdini Engine to pull Copernicus networks into game engine, in this case Unreal Engine. So Copernicus networks can now be moved into your sort of real-time engine of choice if it supports Houdini Engine, which is really great. So far everything has been direct. You create an image and you do something with it. But we also wanted to start taking advantage of Copernicus to create solvers. So this is a 2D fluid solver we're calling Flow. And what this means, it's a GPU accelerated 2D fluid solver. All of Copernicus is GPU accelerated, but so is this solver. And you can see all we've done is take that check mark and basically added it as if it is temperature. And it's pushing around this grid in this 2D fluid-like effect. And of course, because it is in Copernicus, it is tileable as well, so you can create these really interesting effects. But the other thing that's really great is that we're working within these blocks, these simulation blocks. And because this is a 2D solver, we're able to just use standard Copernicus nodes inside. So you're building a solver not out of sort of complicated solver blocks, but of the standard nodes that you use in Copernicus. You can see here I'm just using bright to add some damping to to reduce the temperature over time. I'm also just masking this out so we can see it a little clearly, this sort of check mark producing this smoky-like effect. Or I can throw down some basic distortion nodes where I'm just taking some fractal noise and I'm using that to distort, in this case, the velocity. So I'm taking the velocity from the flow block and I'm distorting it again using just standard tools, which allows us to take this smooth look and tear it apart into this extremely turbulent look. Or I can adjust some of the roughness, for instance, and turn it more into like a smoky sort of a look. And this gives artists the ability to create really interesting results in an intuitive way using tools that they're already familiar with. They don't have to learn a ton about simulations to do this. They're working with tools they already understand. And that allows them suddenly to enter this world where you can start combining all of these things together to create things from scratch purely inside of Copernicus. So maybe we start with scatter shapes for these sort of leaves moving around on these rocks. And we scatter pebbles and stones on the sand and use phaser noise to create this ripple effect on the bottom of this river. And maybe we take curves and we just give them a little bit of animation and we add layer from curves to turn them into sort of reeds under the water. And then with some nodes we don't even have time to talk about, like the light cop and the shadow cop, to actually give it a little bit of depth, to give it a little bit of lighting information. And then we can combine it with flow to give the impression that this actually is sitting within some sort of fluid. And when you combine all these together, you've created a really interesting, rich-looking scene all inside of Copernicus. You're building things from scratch, never leaving the context, and you're still able to create a really rich animation. But of course, you can leave Copernicus. Here we're taking all the data from Flow, and we're using it to drive other types of effects, and obviously rendering them. So maybe you want to drive a vellum grain simulation using the output of Flow to give it this sort of swimming quality. Maybe you want to drive this vellum cloth simulation by pulling out maybe the velocity from the Flow sim to give this sort of pinning, moving, stretching effect that somehow is also fluid-like. Or maybe you want to combine a ton of them together to create this really interesting, again, motion graphic style visual, again, by bridging all these gaps. All these tools are now designed to try and work together as much as possible to give you as much flexibility in how you use them. But as Chris mentioned earlier, that's not the only solver. We also have a reaction diffusion solver. And if you're not familiar with this, it's basically sort of a growth solver. It creates these very organic patterns. So here we're just spreading them out from the seed, which is this star shape, and it spreads out and creates this, in this case, this maze-like appearance. But you can see we're using the same kind of simulation block here in Copernicus. And just so it's clear, these are not based on DOP simulations. There is no DOP core behind this. These simulations are built entirely in Copernicus for Copernicus. So it is a native tool set. And again, because it's sitting here in this world, this 2D world, the artist can intervene here in the middle of this. So again, we'll just do a similar thing we did with the flow solver inside of the reaction diffusion solver here, and just do a simple distortion. But what's really nice about the Copernicus simulation framework here is that I can modify the nodes in the network and see the result as I'm working. I don't always have to play the result. I can actually look step by step what each node is doing in the simulation, which really frees you up artistically to play around and make really interesting changes to what's occurring in the solver, again, in an intuitive, artistically controllable way. And then you can start chaining these together. So here's reaction diffusion for this outer sort of pinkish purplish look, feeding into another one which acts as a collision for the interior points, and then a final for these little points, giving you this strange, somehow graphic design, somehow organic looking animation, which I think is going to open up a lot of cool possibilities. And to get you started, we've included presets to give you ideas of like how these work, how can you generate these different types of patterns. And you can see out of the box, you get a lot of really cool looking effects. But again, it doesn't have to stay in Copernicus. It doesn't have to be a simple 2D image. Use it to drive displacements, for instance. Use it to drive shaders, Material X shaders, to create this sort of, virus spreading sort of effect. Or maybe it's a little more abstract. You're projecting it as a light source onto this geometry to give it an interesting look. Or maybe you're driving texture and displacement simultaneously, and that's driving, in turn, a particle effect. So again, all these things are meant to free you up, to give you ability to go all the way across your pipeline from simple texture creation all the way to final rendering and simulation. And this is a neat example where we've combined flow and reaction diffusion together to kind of push the reaction diffusion around as if it is a fluid, giving you this strange undulating texture that's really even difficult to describe exactly what's happening. But we're not finished. There is another solver, a Pyro solver. And again, I want to be very clear that this is not a DOP-based simulation. This is entirely built in Copernicus. It is a sparse GPU-based solver. You can see we can get really nice detail out of the box by hitting play. Nice high-resolution volume, and it is a full 3D volume. Copernicus is a hybrid 2D, 3D space. So you can see we can take that 3D volume and we can use the new rasterized volume node to turn it into a 2D image plane that looks very rich, almost as if it is rendered without paying the cost of going to something like Karma to do a full volumetric render. And we can continue to modify it here by adding lights. So we have some simple lighting nodes that work with the rasterized volume to let you change the look of your volume. And we're just going to use the curve 3D node that we used before, and we're going to plug it into the light from points, Pyro light from points. And I'm just going to use curve 3D just as convenient for this demo. I can just draw 2 points. Each of those points becomes a light source in our scene. I can change the density reaction to the light for the smoke, give it sort of a softer look. And again, we're in this 2D, 3D hybrid world. I can move those points around on the 2D image plane, but I can also push them behind to light it from behind to give it a backlit effect. All this happening here inside of Copernicus, at your fingertips in real time, which is really freeing. It allows you to work really quickly and get a result that looks great really fast without having to go through the trouble of maybe writing this to disk and going to Karma for these simpler cases. We're also introducing a new feature in Houdini simulations called live simulation. So once I turn on that toggle, I'm now able to let this simulation play and play and play continuously continuously without the timeline moving. You see the timeline staying still. But I can still modify these parameters, change values, and see how they affect my simulation while I'm working. I can also pause these using this new widget at the bottom because I could have multiple live simulations happening at once. So this is a global control for that ability. But the nice thing about having the timeline is that I can still animate things. I can still set keyframes on things, scrub the timeline, but still see it in this live simulation world. And so you can see, just as I've been describing this, we've completely changed the look of this simulation. And again, just to be clear, while we are rasterizing this through a 2D image plane to give it the effect you see here, these are volumes. It is under the hood, it's VDB volumes. You can use images as inputs, but you can also use VDB volumes as inputs. There's nothing preventing you from using this like a traditional Pyro solver. But there's some real nice benefits of having this in 2D because features that are very expensive to do with volumes become very cheap to do in a 2D world. So here we have two new COPs, the bend COP and the lattice deform COP, modifying the output of the Pyro solver in COPs directly, which gives you super fast interactive control. I also just want to point out that this is using our new Python handles for COPs that work both in the 3D viewport and the compositing viewport, allowing you to create Python states and Python handles to customize interactive tools inside of Copernicus that update very quickly and allow you to modify things like this Pyro sim, which I think is a really awesome way to use it. We also started out with a bunch of presets so you can get going, learn this new context, learn the new nodes. It does behave very similarly to what you would expect from the DOPS world, but it has this new framework, new inputs and outputs. So we put together these presets to help you sort of understand how to get up to speed with them. And again, having it there in this world means you can add things like a simple glow to your Pyro, right? So here we just have this sphere following along a curve, and we've just used it to add some nice glow and give it a bit more of a believable effect. But it doesn't even have to be Pyro at the end of the day. Maybe I want to take the output of that and turn it into something completely different, this sort of strange crystalline shape. Maybe it's paint strokes. Maybe I want to make something that's completely artistic and has almost nothing to do with Pyro at all. Maybe you're working with the outline shader in Karma and you want Pyro that fits into that world. So you're going to create this very toon-like Pyro effect with nice toon-looking swirls added into the simulation after the fact. Or use the shape scatter node that we saw earlier to create this sparkle effect. All these things really useful for anything that's an animated texture. Maybe it's sprites for games, effects for games. There's a lot of possibilities here. It is a Pyro solver, but once it's generated and sitting there in 2D, you're free to do whatever you like with it. In this case, we've created some 3D geometry and we're putting those texture maps onto the surface of this sort of twisting fire effect. But of course, you can write it to disk. You can take these volumes, feed them into Karma, and render them as you would traditional volumes. So again, we're not putting you in Copernicus and keeping you there. We want it to be seamless to go all the way through your pipeline. Modeling, animation, texturing, volumetric simulations, all the way to your final renders in Karma for this beautiful colored smoke example. Or maybe you're going to advect curves through it. You're going to create examples, again, that have nothing to do with actual Pyro, and you're just using the data coming out of there to do interesting, cool effects like this. So, everything we've talked about is Copernicus as essentially an image processing context. We're pretty clear to say that it is not a compositor. At least it's not a compositor yet. However, that doesn't mean there's not things that you can use that are very compositor-like, shall we say. So let's say somebody has rendered this sequence of this sort of industrial city, and it's handed to you, it's already rendered, maybe you don't even have access to these assets anymore. And you're looking at it and you're thinking like, well, it looks okay, but it would be nice to add some more interest. It's too static. So let's take advantage of some things inside of Copernicus. So first of all, we'll create a little smoke element here just by letting it play for a moment. And then we'll take that and we'll start putting it into our scene. The first thing we're going to do is take advantage of the fact that EXRs can store the camera's position. That's one of the things it can do. So in Copernicus, we can say load camera, And suddenly the image plane is actually sitting in 3D where the camera's image plane was. And using the depth pass, we can then turn that into a sort of a pseudo 3D scene by using the convert height cop. And you'll see if I move out of the camera's perspective, suddenly I actually have a sort of a pseudo 3D view of my scene. And that means without any tracking or anything along those lines, I can just place my smoke element in 3D space where it would have existed in 3D just by aligning it to this depth pass. And you can see it sits properly there in 3D space. Of course, it's not composited there. We could just composite it using the depth information. But depth can be a little crunchy. So let's do something a little different here. So we'll just position it so you can see like it's not sitting behind that structure the way you want. Let's load all the other AOVs into this file. And we'll take advantage of our new multi-perm UI to select a bunch of these and then delete them all at once, leaving just behind the Cryptomat primitive information that you need to use Cryptomat. And then we'll put down the Cryptomat cop. Cryptomat cop comes with a new state using, again, these new 2D Python states that let you interact with things in Copernicus, again, in the 2D and 3D viewport. And we'll just use it to do something really simple. We'll use this eyedropper to just pick the primitives out of our render. And you can see them being generated there on the node, in the Cryptomat node, a nice clean map. That's the beauty of Cryptomat, is unlike the depth pass, it's very crisp, very highly detailed. And we'll just do the most basic of compositing tricks. We'll invert that mask, and we'll use that to kind of push our smoke element behind this structure. And you can see now I can move it around and it sits correctly in 3D space behind that element. And I can actually play my scene, and again, because it's actually sitting correctly in the real 3D position, it just works. I don't have to do any tracking or anything along those lines. It just shows up where you would expect it to show up. And so we can take that very static scene, and using some of the lighting tools that we talked about, volume rasterize, we can turn this very static scene into something really, really interesting looking, all in the hands of whoever's dealing with this image sequence, right? Not having to throw it back to effects to add things in, not having to learn a whole new tool set, sitting in the same world that they're already familiar with, but being able to do things like add this smoke behind the sign to really pull out the sign, draw attention to it, or just add overall interest to the scene. So we've talked a lot about solvers, a lot about dynamics, all in compositing. And now I'm going to hand it off to Alexandra to talk about the DOP world, NPM, and so on. So let's invite Alex up to the stage.
Thank you, Scott. So this is it, people. Dynamics, the art and soul of Houdini. First up is the Pyro shelf tools. So all of these have been completely rebuilt to better align with production needs. So this is no educational material. This is versions and recipe that you can drop in production to help you with your shots. So let's start with this first example of the dry ice shelf tool that we can just look at it as an example. It drops down our SUP network. In this case, we have pre-simulated the cache so you can just see the results right away. And for each of the recipe that we're shipping, we're now packaging also a Solaris network, so you can get quick renders of your simulation in no time, like you're seeing here. Here you see the final render of this recipe, but we have many more. We have like burning debris, we have this candle fire, this large explosion, we have detailed fire, wispy smoke, and this is just to name a few. And all of these high-end results now come as part of this shelf. Another very popular effects are these thrusters that you see here. And again, you can just start from a recipe in Houdini and you get a working setup to do your thrusters. This does not rely on simulation at all, so this is fully procedural. And the final effects of the thruster is built from many different layers where you have complete control over the artistic look of those layers. So you can really build something unique for your needs. And when you're done with that, you can go in Solaris and again, render your stuff. And as you can see, it looks a lot like the preview we were seeing in subs, which is great. Here you can see the effects in the context of this flying spaceship. And you can also see this cool heat haze effects that is applied to the background checkerboard. This is done with Copernicus, and it also comes as part of this recipe. Okay, switching gear to ML-based Pyro upres. Sounds pretty mysterious, right? Okay, let me tell you a little story that happens every single day in VFX. So you're an FX artist and you're being tasked to do this smoke plume in a shot, and you decide to just do a small low-res sim and put it in dailies just to get some feedback. And then your supervisor falls in love with this shot. This is the best smoke he's ever seen in his life. And he tells you, I want the exact same thing. Don't change a thing. Just add a little bit more details and we're good. This is going in the movie. This is where you realize you're in big trouble, because on the very next day, you show up this version and obviously there's more details. So looks fine, but your supervisor doesn't like it as much and he starts flipping between the two versions. And it tells you, oh, I think you just missed what I said yesterday. I want the exact same shape, same motion, same everything. Just give me more details. And you know what he wants, but there's no tool for that. So I think you know where I'm going with this, right? So now there's a tool for that. So you can take your low resolution simulation and add those high resolution details on top of it. And this is using ML. Here we have a split screen with the low resolution input on the left and the ML upres on the right. And you can see how seamlessly the simulation is going from one side to the other. Again, you can start from this recipe that we're shipping. The one thing that you do is you build a high resolution simulation first, just to show the tool what is the kind of detail that you're expecting. And then you train the model to basically be able to replicate those details. And then you have your low resolution sim, and you can apply the model that you just trained to get back those high resolution details. Here's another example. On the left, you have the input in low res, and on the right, you have the ML upres. And if we look at a still frame, you can see all of this glorious details that is being brought back to this flame simulation. Now, if we look at those flames in a broader context of this burning bar, again, we are flipping from the low resolution input to the ML upres. And I want to talk a little bit more about how this will affect your workflow. So in this scene, you have 10 simulations. The low resolution sim takes about 12 minutes to do, and then the high resolution takes 3 hours and a half. Training the model to do the ML upraising takes about 2 hours and a half, but after that, the inference is about 46 seconds per frame. So here how it works. Before, you would do 3 hours and a half of work, like of computation, every single version. Now, what you can do is you do one high-res simulation of the flame, then you train your model, so you invest like 6 hours of work right there, but you don't care about it because you know you're going to reach version 64, right? Like you're going to iterate a lot on this shot. So after that, your iteration cycle is much better because you can do your simulation in low res. So you distribute them across 10 machines, 12 minutes. And then you can massively distribute the inference step, like 1 frame on every machine if you have enough compute power. And then your iteration cycle is just 15 minutes instead of 3 hours and a half. So we were talking about ML volume upraising. This is volume compression. This is a plugin that was created by this cool company called Zebra AI. And we are currently hosting at SideFX and maintaining with the labs team this plugin. It allows you to, as I said, compress your volume up to 99%. So it's really useful in VFX because it makes your cache a lot smaller on disk. But it's also useful for games because you can play those VDB sequence in a game engine. And here you can see the final shot rendered with the lighting in Unreal 5 using Niagara particles as well. Okay, moving on to car destruction now. So in the previous release, we had this tool where you can rig vehicle and have them move around in a physically plausible manner. But where's the fun in that if you can't destroy them? Now you'll be happy to learn that we have a very straightforward and easy way to destroy those cars, and as well as other vehicles as well. And in Houdini, it works very simply. You have your animation like that of the car driving around and flipping at some point. And then it's just a matter to identify the different parts of the car. So what is glass, what is metal, what is rubber. And then the tool is going to generate the proxy geometry, the constraint networks, and the high-res fractured geometry for you. Then you can go in the dive target, and then maybe you add additional constraints just to define how those separate pieces are going to be held together. And this is also a good way to art-direct how it's going to be destroyed. Then you can go out, do another RBD simulation with this newly created destroyable rig, and you get those cool animation like you see here. But this is not only applicable to cars. You can also use the toolset to explode this airplane. So very flexible and very useful overall. And now we have this cool demo created using the tool. And I just want you to know that this also works with geometry that was not designed for simulation. So it saves you a lot of the tedious work related to car destruction. Okay, now let's talk about surfacing. So in this release, we are introducing the neural point surface. And yes, this is another ML tool that we're shipping in Houdini. So most of you are already familiar with the process of surfacing. You have a bunch of points that represent this continuous surface, and you're trying to reconstruct the underlying surface of this material. And it seems like a solved problem already because we're all doing it. But recently, some researchers have tried to solve this problem using neural network, and it gave pretty interesting results. So we decided to give it a closer look. So here we are in Houdini. We're looking at this shader ball just as an example. And we're going to fill that with point. And then if we look at the output for the neural point surface, we have this sign distance field that is generated for us. And we can also look at the polygonal output just to get a sharper preview. Then if we open up the parameters, we are currently looking, we are using the balance model. And this model will give you sharp features, but also smooth surfaces. If you want even a smoother surface, there's a model for that especially. And we also have a liquid and granular model, specially designed for those types of material. You can even build your own surfacer if you want. More about that later. So let's now look at some examples. So here we are comparing the typical way of surfacing this beach scene in Houdini versus the new way using the liquid model. And I'll be honest with you, looking at it in motion like that, it's almost impossible to see the difference, especially if you see it for the first time. So let's switch to a still frame. And now it becomes more obvious that those flat areas are just a lot more glassy, there's less noise in them, and also those sharp features on top of the water are just more defined and more crisp. Here's another example with this snowball falling on this wedge. And again, if I switch to a still frame, you can just see that using the neural point surface approach, you get a wider range of details. So you get those very high frequency details, but also those low frequency details that highlight the general structure of the snow. And this is not really something that you see with the reference where everything is uniformly fuzzy. And finally, we're looking at some results from our balance model with this robot. And if you look closely at the leg, you're going to see that the flat panels and the sharp corners are just better reconstructed with the neural point surface, as well as the thin plates near the feet where you can see holes with the reference approach. This method is also very robust and temporally stable. So if you do animation, you're not going to get like popping everywhere. I would say you're going to get results either as good or superior to other workflows in Houdini. Okay, this is really for the geeks out there. So if you want to dig deep and understand everything about this system, we're going to ship the whole training setup on the content library. So here on the left, you have the subnetwork that builds all of the data sets that were used. And here you have a top network that will first build the data sets, and after that it will train all of the models that we're shipping using PyTorch behind the scene. So from a single PDG network, you can just trigger everything that we've built. And after that, it's just a matter of using the neural point surface and point to your newly created Onyx model, and here you go, you have built your own surfacer. So hopefully it will give you the guidance necessary to do your experiments. It's been a very busy year with NPM. We have added a lot of features based on your feedback, and also 4 new nodes to streamline the post-simulation workflow. So the first feature that we added is the surface tension feature, where you have this droplet of water that can now be simulated falling onto those leaves like that. And you also have those cool droplets hanging to this top leaf, which looks pretty cool. This allows you to create shots like these, where you can create those fine tendrils of paint. Very good for product shots, very good for MoGraph as well. Can also do effects like this, where you have rain falling on this car and flowing across the surface. Here we have just the water layer in isolation, so you can really see it. Okay, this is pretty cool. So we have enhanced our deforming collider with NPM. So these are a lot more reliable and accurate than they used to be. And this opens up many opportunities, such as straightforward upraising without going through distributed simulation. And let me explain that a little bit more. So in this shot, this was our primary NPM simulation. So it looks very low res, like you can see the individual points, but this is already 80 million points. So even if you're running on a pretty beefy graphic card, you won't be able to push that much further. So what you can do with NPM, it's very easy to detect where things are breaking. So you simply divide what is not breaking becomes a deforming collider, and everything else you fill it with points at a higher resolution. And then you can do a secondary NPM simulation. And this will give you a visual equivalent of 640 million points instead of 80 million. But it doesn't stop there, because if you want, you can create even a higher resolution point cloud and then retarget the dynamics of your primary and secondary NPM simulation onto this iris point cloud. In this case, you have a visual equivalent of 1.5 billion points. And at the end of the day, you can just tie all the elements together with this fine debris layer, and you get the final effect. So it's good to be rendering points, but I know a lot of you are also interested in rendering the actual asset that you got from LookDev. And this has always been possible before, but it was pretty technical, and you really had to build your own system for that. So now, just to help you with this, we are introducing two new nodes, the NPM pulse fracture and the NPM deform pieces, and this will help streamlining this workflow. So in Houdini, we have this sheet of metal, and we have a collider going through it. And we're interested in retargeting the dynamics of the simulation onto this asset that has the UVs and all our attributes that we need for rendering. So if we look at the output of the NPM pulse fracture node, you can see it's grabbing the end state of the NPM simulation, and it's fracturing the geometry so that after that you can have it breaking at the right spot. Then you pass the output of this node to the NPM deform pieces, and it will properly retarget and apply the dynamics of the NPM simulation on this newly fractured geometry. This can be used in more complex scenes, like this train wreck example. In this case, we're looking at the NPM points. And here, we're looking at the LookDev asset with the NPM dynamics being retargeted on it. This also works with other materials, such as concrete. And again, we're looking at the NPM points. And here, we're looking at the LookDev asset with the textures applied and everything. The toolset will make sure to generate detail on the interior faces, create UVs, and transfer all the shading attributes that you need to create cool renders of your sim. And sometimes you want to be able to surface your point cloud similar to what you would do with flips. So in this case, we have introduced the NPM surface node. So it allows you to create this sign distance field around your particles. This is one of the outputs, but you can also output a polygonal mesh. And in this case, we're transferring both the UVs and the color attribute from the rest geometry that we're seeing right here. And then if we look again at the output from the NPM surface, and if we look at a couple of frames on the timeline, you can see that the UVs are properly tracking on the surface. And on the very first frame, you can also see that we're transferring the UVs per UV island to get those very clean cuts in between the different UV patches. Here you get this higher resolution simulation of this pumpkin being destroyed, and the skin and the interior are being meshed with the NPM surface. Here you can see how the UVs are properly sticking to the skin of the pumpkin. And finally, the last node that we added for post-simulation is this NPM debris source. So it takes as input the NPM simulation as particle and SDF, and it will figure out where the material is breaking, and it will generate those emission points. Then you can pass that to a simple pop network, and it will generate the secondary layer for you. And in this specific case, we're just rasterizing both the NPM particles and the secondary points to density grid, so they can after that be just combined together before rendering. Here we have our previous example of this building collapsing, but we have highlighted the secondary debris just to show you the kind of effects you can get with this new node. In this release, we are also adding this auto-sleep mechanism with NPM. So this will help you to speed up your simulation where most of the points are static throughout the sim. And in this case, you have like 3 wolves running through the snow, and we visualize the activation and deactivation of the points. And here you have the final shot with the snow properly rendered as snow. And finally, the last feature that we added is this continuous emission expansion. This now allows you to source material on top of existing material. It creates internal pressure and expansion of the material. This is super useful for effects like this whipped cream. And now I want to leave you with this very cool NPM demo. Enjoy. And now I'll pass it over to Rob Stauffer to wrap this up.
Lots of stuff, huh? We've been busy. So here, just to give you an idea of how busy, here's a complete list of all of the new features in Houdini 21. We obviously couldn't get to everything today. Some of the things that we would have loved to have shown were things like a new layout lop, some enhancements to that in Solaris for things like set dressing, a GLTF character importer that brings in animation and skin, as well as a completely redesigned or info node or info panel that touches every node inside of Houdini, and it gives you sort of a glimpse into some of the changes that are coming to the UI. And some of the sort of less sexier enhancements are things like Houdini loading much faster, sometimes seconds instead of minutes. Pre-compiled Karma XPU shaders to make Karma startup time a little bit faster, and a completely re-engineered audio feature set for things like lip sync and so on. So yeah, lots of great things to come. I want to thank everyone that made this possible, Houdini 21 possible, as well as today. Developers, marketing, sales, artists, freelancers, and of course, our alpha beta testers, and everyone else at SideFX. And so thank you all for coming.